through life, we're going to see things and we're going to hear things, and even us, we're going to say, what is it, my sin that's causing this trauma? We're going to go through that a little bit. We're going to be able to figure out what Jesus says about it, and also the way the world, or even the Pharisees, saw it. And then we're going to go into an area where we see that the obedience of the blind man. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the first part of the book, and then it moves into more of a confrontation that we see between the Pharisees and Jesus. And we'll see the reactions of many people around it. It's very, very interesting, and we kind of put ourselves in that place, at least I did, to figure out where would I fall in regard to the blind man and the way his conviction held him. And we're going to also see the way that Jesus had some controversy with Jesus, as we've seen in the past, about doing miracles or doing work on the Sabbath day. And then we're going to see at the end, and we're going to see where it leads from blindness to, Lord, I believe. It's going to be a nice journey that the blind man has. But that's not the intent of the entire story. What it is we're going to be able to see that entire progression, but we're also going to see it kind of build. And, one of the things when I was reading it, I saw some commentaries, and one of them identified C.S. Lewis in a book that he wrote. And I think that this was really important to the way that we see things and how we can explain things. And it says, the problem of pain is the name of the book. And when you think about it, pain is also sorrow, it's also tragedy, anything. And it says, if God were good, he would wish to make his creatures perfectly happy. And if God were almighty, he would not be able to do what he wished. But the creatures are not happy, therefore God lacks goodness, or power, or both. The problem is that the problem of suffering and disability is an issue that every human has. We have that all the time. We always were wondering and struggling with that. Why is God doing this to us? Couldn't he just fix this for us? And we're going to kind of delve into that when we start seeing a little bit of the blind man and also some of the comments that he says. And of course, C.S. Lewis starts out with that quote, and then he works on through and he identifies some of the area. But it's kind of an area that we see in this chapter, particularly at the beginning. And again, from blindness to worship, you can see how it goes. And one of the big ideas of this we also know from the past chapters is, who is the light of the world? Jesus is. And we start seeing that in some of the ideas that he talks about. When he talks about blindness, he talks about seeing, light, dark. It's all locked into the same theme that John the Apostle puts forth to us in this. So with that, let's take a look at the first chapter and the first verse. And let's do it this way. Let's read from the first section of it, which is 1 through 5, and then we're going to go to the end, and we're going to be able to kind of do a quick glimpse of before and after, and then we'll kind of work our way through it and see. But I'm going to read it from 1 to 5.
As he passed by, he saw a blind man from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the work of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when there is no one who can work. As long as I am in the world, I am of the light of the world. Having said these things...
That's good right there. Okay, now let's take a look at the last section at 35. And I get to read it from 35 to 41.
Jesus heard that they had cast him out. Having found him, he said, Do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Jesus said, For judgment I came into this world, for those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, Are we also blind? Jesus said to them, If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains.
Yeah, I wanted to read that last part to you because it's going to kind of outline, it's going to give us, it was basically a teaser at the end. We're going to be able to see the direction that Jesus was going with this entire section about being able to see blind. And before he does that though, in verse 1, let's go there. As he passed by, which is Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. So we know he's been blind from birth. Everybody knows he's been blind from birth. And as his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Now that's something that we see, a lot of times whenever we struggle with this, I know we all do, is that whenever there's something bad happens, we always look back on ourselves and say, what did I do to cause this? Did I do something to cause this? Is God punishing me? And that's what these guys are asking immediately. The first thing is you got a blind guy sitting here. They're all walking down. Jesus notices it, and then his disciples, first thing they ask, they didn't even ask about, hey, why did you heal him? Can you do this? What else is there? The first thing they ask is, what? Who sinned to make this guy like this? What do you think about that? What do you think?
It's almost like Job, where friends just thought that something was work, that he must have done something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same thing. And we're going to get into Job, and there's also Ecclesiastes that talks about that. Go ahead.
The name for this is retributive justice. This idea that things happen in this sort of cycle of revenge and repayment. And it's supported theologically in lots of ways by, the prophets. The prophets are full of Israel's sin, so they'll be punished. This nation's sin, so they'll be punished. There's lots of this notion throughout the Bible, so it's not unheard of. But it seems to have made its way into people's personal lives in a way that doesn't make
Right.
sense.
And it's a common assumption that they have. But, as Mike said in Job 8, in 3 through 7, what was his name? Bildad? He basically says, what did you do to have this be put on you? Right? What did you do to God? And what was God's reason for this? It was unusual. I'm not saying it's usual, but it's unusual. What did he do? Did God do that? He allowed it. But why did he do that?
He made a bet with the devil.
It wasn't a bet. But what did he do? He tested it, right? He says, well, you build a shelter around Job. How can I test it? He says, I'll tell you what. Do it and see what happens. So when Job went through it and he was successful, what did we get out of that? We could see the glory of God. Is that right? The glory of God came through in that situation. And we're going to see also a little bit more when he specifically says that in this verse here, why this guy was blind. Why this guy was blind from birth. So Jesus answered, verse 3. It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works with him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when where no one can work. So what do we see here? Jesus answered it. It is not what? It is not the man who sinned or his parents, but to do what?
Works of God might be displayed in him.
How is that? When he explains that, what do we think of when we see that? How can that be?
Well, miracles going to be done.
We see it in Job, for one. Go ahead. Mike.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I know we're going to get into this because the overall thing, Jesus is doing these things for a reason, a spiritual reason. That he was blind, but he's be able to see. And then the Pharisees thought they could see, but they were actually the ones who were blind. That makes them guilty. That's the people that actually have the sin and effect. So I think it's you show a spiritual reason as well here.
How can we apply that to our lives, though, now? If this is the situation in this case. Is there anything that we can kind of think about or see or do? I mean, we see tragedy all the time. We've just seen it a few months ago, a month ago, with a tragic killing in front of everybody. People would say, why did God let that happen? For the glory of God? Do we look for things for the glory of God? When things like that happen, we should. We got to be able to try to extrapolate that. And we do. We see that here with this blind man. We'll be able to see that. We'll be able to see the impact that it has.
The apostles' lack of compassion is the glory.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and
And we can be compassionate of people less fortunate.
you know, and that reminds me of even his disciples when they come up and they walk by this blind man. I mean, the blind man was probably right there. Who sinned, him or your parents? You know, he's right there. Listen to him. Is that very compassionate? No, it isn't, because they were thinking like we think sometimes. Like you were just saying, sometimes we can be not compassionate for things and not understand and be mad. Of course we can be mad, but we have to be able to figure out, as Jesus says, it says that this man did not sin but for the works, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Things happen. What about Paul? Same thing.
It's a little bit of a twist, because in the old law, you could be a priest if you had a deformity of some sort or were not a perfect specimen, I guess. But here's this man, he's set up for the glory of God, so that's a twist. Now, you know, and so maybe when we have some handicap or whatever we might think it is, maybe it's not so bad.
And maybe we should look for what?
For the glory of God.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely. That's the
Paul said he was made perfect.
Mhm. That's right. And Paul had the thorn in his side. He prayed to get rid of it. What happened? What was the answer?
Grace is sufficient for you.
Exactly. And he worked it out to make it, you know, a glory, you know, for the glory of God. All that he did. Yeah, very good. Any more comments on that section? Go ahead.
This is such a, I mean, you're talking about the lack of compassion on other people's part. Jesus' compassion here is really beautiful. I think it deserves attention because he's refusing to blame anybody. He's refusing to enter into that sort of conversation. He just says that, you know, he looks at this man who people probably look down on. You know, who see him as a sort of second-class person who's, you know, just sort of left by the wayside. Right? This man is really the glory of God, we see. And, you know, we can kind of connect ourselves to old blind Bart here. Right?
And the blindness, where he was blind and then he can see light, was the very same thing that here. As long as I'm in this world, I am the light of this world.
That's a great point. It reminds me of in Luke chapter 13, where people come and tell him about these Galileans who were put to death while they were offering sacrifices. And then he says, do you think they were worse sinners? No, but unless you repent, you'll also perish. And then he talks about, and then there were 18 who the Tower of Siloam fell and killed. Were they worse sinners? No, but unless you repent, you'll also perish. So he's taking these things and he's taking, he knows that the crowd is assuming they're worse sinners. They did something to deserve that fate.
Mhm.
But he's refocusing it on what is important, which is there's eternal death, there's a worse fate, and that's what he's there to administer for, the cure for.
Right.
Their priorities were skewed.
So from 6 to, I would say, down to 12, it kind of shifts into a different scene. And now here's where Jesus takes action. So it's an action scene. After he talked to them about who is the sinner, who is the sinner, he explains that to them. He says he is the light, and then what does he do? Having said these things, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and he washed and he came back seeing. I saw this and I'm like, wow. You know, Jesus, he could just went like that and just made him, boom, from darkness to light, and then walked out. But why do you think that he did that with the mud, and also to be able to have the individual go down to the pool? He could have just had him go right there. Wow, that's cool of Jesus.
You have to have the faith. You
Had to be faith.
Exactly, right there.
Yeah.
The obedience while blind,
Yeah.
right? This sinner he had to do some action. It wasn't just boom, he hit it and he's gone, right? So he did have some action. There was something else with the mud that's critical, and we'll see that as it comes further on. What is that?
Spit.
Yeah, spit. But why mud? Why did he do that? It's the Sabbath, right? There's a problem with that. What do the Jews think? They think that what?
He was working.
They think that he's working on the Sabbath, right? Okay, he's working on the Sabbath because he's kneading dough, he's doing mud, he's mixing it. They think that that's work. I really believe that's exactly why he did that, because he was going to use that as an absolute area that he's going to be able to make another point.
Sir, it's also symbolic baptism. I mean, he is dirty. He
Washing.
and goes and cleans. So, and
Actions needed. Actions needed. You think he needed to spit and he needed to use the saliva in the mud? No. He could have did it any way he wanted to. However, he did it for that reason, sir. Ma'am.
And this man didn't know Jesus before this point, but he actually did exactly what Jesus told him to
Right.
do.
Yeah. Right. Application for us. Pretty easy, right? We have action, we have to do something. We have to be able to obedience while blind. We don't quite understand, but we know this that we have to do something. All right, good. All right, so he comes back seeing. Well, apparently he didn't see Jesus because Jesus shot off and left him there. So the neighbors, in verse 8, the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" And some said, "It is." Others said, "No, but he is like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." So they said to him, "Then how were your eyes open?" So even the neighbors were mixed, right? Is that similar to even now? People are always mixed. Some people believe, some people don't, some people will see something different. In this kid's situation, the neighbors even were in question immediately when he came up. What is the man saying? "Yes, it's me. It's me, absolutely."
So they were in awe of it, you know.
Sure.
Right.
Disbelief, right?
Yeah, it's first, well, since birth, so he hadn't been out there, going out
Disbelief.
there a lot to beg.
Yeah, they were in disbelief. They needed to have some type of, that's understandable, but there's only so long we can be in disbelief. Okay, and so then he takes it another step, and he answered. Okay, this is what he answered after they asked him. "Then how were your eyes open?" And he answered, "The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam, and wash.' So he went and he washed, and I received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." So at this point, the blind man sees Jesus as just a man named Jesus. I have no other information. But I went and I did that, and now I can see. They don't believe him. Some believe him, some don't. Who knows what? So what happens next? Yeah. Okay, so he says, "Where is he?" Okay, so then in 13, they brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. And you know, the Pharisees, they're going to be like, "Wow, okay, that's great, wonderful, let's take care of this." Right? Of course not. they're sitting there. I'm just picturing this too. And, so they brought the man who had been merely blind, and now it was the Sabbath day. Jesus made mud and opened the eyes, although we can see a problem here already, those Pharisees. Right away, it's the Sabbath day. They weren't even sitting there thinking, "Wow, were you really blind?" Checking it out. The first thing they were thinking was, "Well, mud. Who made mud? Who was that?" Not of the miracle or who did it or try to figure out who did it. What's the first thing they think of?
This man sinned.
Somebody sinned. Let's figure this out. Application. We can be blind sometimes like that. Right? First thing we do is figure out the sin before we even think of anything else. We can be blind of that. we have to be able to be more open-minded like this blind man who was healed. When I point like that, I'm pointing to the blind man. I don't believe I'm trying to look around and see if there's anybody there.
Where is this man you speak of?
Okay, so the Pharisees asked him again, how did you receive your sight? And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and he washed them, and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he doesn't keep the Sabbath. So right away, what did they talk about?
Not the miracle, straight to
No.
the Sabbath.
No. And these guys, and we're gonna, spoiler alert, they think that they're all knowing. They think that they can see, right? So something is blinding them. Let's figure out what's going on here. So he says, this is not a man from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? So we have a mixed area, right? Mixed group. Now, I don't know if when they said others said, I don't know if that was Pharisees or Jews, or if it was just people in the crowd. We don't know that. But it doesn't matter because we have that split type of mentality today as well.
Well, it says there was division among them, so.
You think it was the Pharisees?
Pharisees.
Yeah, because that's who they took him to. So that's interesting as well. But even with the division, it doesn't go to the point of belief. Let's just kind of go there. There's still a doubt, and they're trying to figure it out, right? So he says he doesn't keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was division among them. Verse 17. So they said again to the blind man, they go back to the blind guy again. What do you say about him? Since he has opened your eyes. He said, he is a prophet. So we see that the blind man starts thinking about it, hearing these folks going back and forth about a sinner doing things on the Sabbath. He thought at first he was Jesus the man. Now what's he saying? He's saying he's a prophet. So we see him moving a little bit closer, Interesting. And this is the man who was blind and now can see. Right? Let's keep that in perspective. And we can also kind of figure out where the Pharisees are. They think they can see, but we'll find out where they're at. All right. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and he received his sight until they called the parents. So they wanted to call the parents of the man who received the sight. And they asked him, is this your son who you say has been blind from birth, born blind? How does he see now? What does his parents say? Let's take a look at that in verse 20. His parents answered, we know that he is our son and that he was born blind, but how he sees now, I do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Understandably, that's a good answer. But then the next part is, ask him. He's of age. Okay? Isn't it kind of interesting, though, how the parents react in that situation? We find out a little later why they're acting like that. And there's a reason for it, because they're all after Jesus. They're all waiting for something to happen.
It sounds like they weren't there, so, like, ask him.
Yeah, he's of age. Yeah, so, I mean, reasonable at this point. Okay, so, let's see.
They were a little afraid at this point.
Well, that's right, and we're going to find that out a little later, why they were afraid. Can we be afraid sometimes? Oh, yeah. You know, sometimes we don't want to speak up, right? Because the crowd is in a whole different area. Maybe we have too much to lose, or at least we think we do. Miss Ann?
I have a footnote to where verse 18 says, the Jews did not believe, and it says these are probably Jewish leaders that had some kind of authority, and so that's why the big deal was made over this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, We do find that out because they had the power to do what? We're going to find this out later. Spoiler alert: kick someone out of their synagogue, out of their place of worship. So they did. You're absolutely right, Miss Ann. They had power. So that would be a reason why the parents were a little bit cautious about that, right? And again, we can be like that too. Should we be like that? Absolutely not. Not when it comes to God or Christ. That's when we have to be able to take a stand. And we'll see how the blind man answered this question. He's very interesting too. And the parents answered in verse 20, he was born blind, asked him. That was back in verse 21. And then in 22, in parentheses, in my version, it says, his parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ was to be out of the synagogue. So they were already waiting for this type of situation to happen. Any comments, questions? Okay. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age. Ask him. Throwing it back on the kid, right? And you know, it's like somebody said, throwing him under the bus. It's a situation, and you also got to think of this as a child. The first thing is, he was blind from birth, and now he is absolutely clear. Don't you think his parents would be like, wow, who did this? I know you were blind. It's an absolute miracle, right? Instead, they were afraid. They said, ask him. He's of age. He seems like he's handling himself well. Interesting. Very interesting. And I always got to place myself in that situation. How would John react, right, to that situation? And when something of that nature was on the line. And in this case, they knew that the Jews had the power, but the power was against God.
So, at this point, Jesus is becoming a threat to their...
Yeah, he's gaining power.
Following the law and obeying the law and strictness and customs and all of that. Jesus is coming and throwing monkey wrenches.
Sure. And these Jewish leaders were in the best position to understand that the Messiah was coming. They should have been looking out for that, but they were looking out for themselves. It seemed like it anyway. Okay, so for the second time they called the man. He had been blind, and he said to them, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. Okay, give glory. He said, they're asking him, I want you to profess that God is glorified, but this man is a sinner. And he answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was blind, and now I can see. So he's like, you know what, I'm not going to do any of that, but I'll just tell you what I do know. Right? So then they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I told you already, and you do not listen. What do you want to hear? You want to hear it again? And then he says, do you also want to become his disciple? So he's kind of being sarcastic at that point. I'll tell you it again. You must want to know it because you want to be his disciple. That's the last thing that they want to do, and he knew that. Seemingly, anyway. It was interesting how he starts getting a little bit bolder, isn't it, as he goes on through as well. Should we get bolder when we're talking about Christ? Yeah, he was getting that boldness. And then he says, and they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, why, this is amazing. This is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world has begun has it ever been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. Only God can, only Jesus and God can give sight to eyes. Boom, like that, in that situation. And if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, You were born in utter sin, back to the sin again, and you would teach us? You can teach us this? No, you're in sin. Then what did they say? They cast him out. Isn't that interesting? What's your thoughts on that?
Couldn't win the argument, so they just call him the name.
You're a sinner. How can you teach us anything? We're not sinners.
They're not used to being talked back to at all. I mean, they're the leaders of all the religious ideology back then, and they're just not used to being talked back to. And then it quickly becomes a caste system or a hierarchy of social power, and they fall into their own pride at that point. And we definitely, I think, could do that as Christians talking to non-believers. I think that that's something like that we need to be aware of. Like, we're saved, they're not. I think that can happen. It's just something we need to be aware of.
Right. And one other thing is that, this man, he risked everything as well. He was cast out of the community. You would have think that he had a whole new life. He was given something, and he's like, okay, I'm going to spend it now in the synagogue with you all. No, he didn't care. He was bold in what he did in the synagogue.
And not only that, this man, his whole life, depending on someone to lead him to go places, could actually see more than what these Jewish leaders could see, having sight all the time. He could see what this man was, Jesus, and what he had done, and what God would do for people.
He was blind, and now his eyes are open.
It reminds me of when Nicodemus came to him. I'm sorry, plan I get that. Nicodemus said, "We know that you are a teacher come from God, but no one does these things unless God is with him." So they knew that someone's doing miracles that they're from God, but
They overlooked it. They were, in actuality, and we're going to read this one more time in the last, they were the ones that were blind, or even thought that they could see, but they needed to be blind.
I was just going to say, I think it shows the intelligence of this blind man as well. Just because he was disabled, he was very intelligent in how he spoke and how he handled the situation.
Yeah. And sometimes some of the most loyal converts, for lack of a better word, followers of Christ are the ones who have their eyes open, boom, and they can see. Whereas if we have been so close to the situation and we think that we can see,
I think a lot of people can just bring a lot of baggage to Bible studies when they're learning the truth too. And whatever they've been taught in the past, like these Pharisees already have all these preconceived ideas. And they're bringing all this baggage to the situation with Jesus and this formerly blind man, and they're not seeking. And I know Philip has studied with people before who knew nothing.
right, clean
Nothing.
slate.
They were a clean slate, and they were pointing out stuff from these Bible passages that surprised Philip and taught him.
Right,
you
because
know?
they had an open mind in
But this-
regard to what they
yeah.
were learning.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
anybody can
Right.
have a.
And this is where Jesus comes in at the end to really drop the hammer on the Pharisees as well. He says, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, being the blind man, now the man who can see, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Very good question. Jesus said to him in verse 37, you have seen him, and it is he who you are speaking to. Amazing. Verse 38, he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. We went from all the way from blindness. He's the man who they thought sinned. Obedience while he was blind. And now he believes. And what does he do? He goes and he worships him. He just doesn't believe. He worships him. Absolutely amazing story. Okay, so and then Jesus says, as he follows through, Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. What do you think that's all about? Pretty deep stuff. What is that? So who is it? So let's say, for example, the Pharisees and the Jews, where do they lie?
They're the ones that are actually blind, but they think they see.
They are the ones who are blind, but they think that they can see. They think that they have the light. And Jesus says, you do not have the light. You have to become blind and then be able to see.
That makes you have faith. You know, you are humble and believe that you don't know. And God is revealable.
So, a lot of times, whenever you're the strongest and the most needful is when you need help, when you understand it. Do you think that blind man needed help? Yeah. Do you think those Jews think they need help? They're on top of the world. They don't need help. They're not looking to Jesus. This man was looking. Once he found it, he went and he seeked it out. And once he found it, he didn't even know at the time it was there. It was right in front of him. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, are we also blind? Asking the question real smart, right? And what does Jesus say? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt, but now that you say we see, your guilt remains. Yes, Ann?
I have a footnote for that. If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains.
So what do we get from this section here, besides seeing Jesus do a sign and a wonder, a beautiful thing? What do we take from that? How do we move forward with this information?
John puts it in the reason. It's not just a story, just like the parable about Canaan. There's a reason for it. I think it's to point out basically the last point of the Pharisees were blind and they had guilt.
Right. I also take from it tragedy. Tragedy is a whole different thing. Don't look at it as Jesus or God is causing it, or you caused it. Now there are certain things, of course, that we do cause, our own tragedy of drinking, drunken driver, all of those types of things. However, who is behind it, and what can we use it for?
Verse 38 reminds me that I've had discussions with people who are under, I guess it's a delusion, they just don't study, that Jesus never claimed to be God, or he never allowed people to worship him, but we see that this man worshiped him. And it just reminds me that the outcome of understanding what Christ has done for us is that we do worship him. We do recognize him as the Messiah. We do make him central to our view of the world and our understanding of our eternal life. We have to.
Right. Sir?
Yeah, I'm not really touching on that, but I think verses 1 through 5, and then especially verse 39, I think it really just kind of reiterates that, like, your perspective on adversity, right, needs to be is more of like it's an opportunity. Because without adversity, then you can't be resilient in the face of adversity.
Right. And look to God to be able to figure out how to get through this.
Yeah, I think it is all about perspective. King kind of pointed out earlier. God sees things in the view of eternity. We're only seeing what's happening right now.
Exactly. About me.
If we could have that other perspective, if we could understand that this life means very little, it's a very short period of time, we would just look forward to the time of being with him. That's a perspective we should try to have.
Right.
Also, we can look at it, I look at it as some are blind, but then they see the Word of God and it opens their eyes and they see the need for God in their lives.
Right. It's almost like this. At times, even before I was a Christian, I think I could see, right? I had to get blind before I could really see what I needed. And then if tragedy comes around, even now I'll struggle with it, but make sure that I focus back on verse 39.
See, this blind man, he didn't recognize God. He didn't know he needed him. but whenever he recognized God and the power of Jesus, he understood he needed him.
Right. One more comment.
The way to approach the Bible is maybe as you find that Pharisees were making it complicated.
Yes.
Bringing in all this other stuff.
Their own traditions.
And, yeah.
Right.
Just make it time.
Right. Thank you for your comment.